will call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order. It is May 28th, 2019, 6:32. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
Yep.
And we'll take a roll call vote. Looks like every commissioner is here except Commissioner Kudo, who is excused, and Commissioner Carpenter, who is also excused but will be joining us shortly.
And Commissioner.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I
you
didn't
did.
tell. What's her name, Jack? You know I need name tags.
She also contacted us earlier today that she was not going to make it.
Okay, thanks. So our first item on the agenda is approval of the April 30th, 2019 minutes. And I would like to say that, again, I think they were brilliant and great. Love her minutes. Does anyone have any concerns or comments?
Just a couple of little tweaks. On page 3, the second paragraph from the bottom, that last sentence, it should read, uniformity is one thing, but what does an addition of a porch, I think, a porch to a property due to the adjacent owners' enjoyment of their properties. Owners.
But what is an addition of a porch to? Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. And then at the top of the next page, it talks about, top of page 4, that first sentence, talks about this long, various examples, as long as the porch is within 8 feet of the lot line. And I thought we've been discussing it can't be more than 10 feet. So I was just wondering where that page came from. Is it 10?
Correct, that's what has been drafted.
And it could just have been what Dan might have said, so as I'm listening to it,
Yeah. It's always messing things up, isn't it?
but I can change that to 10.
And then just one other little tiny insertion on page 6. Let me see. 5, 6, 7th paragraph, second line. Says, and what you can do in a front yard going back decades, there should be an and. Decades, and how do other communities honor those goals?
Okay.
And that makes sense.
Cool. Great, thanks. Commissioner Kylie Miller. Any other comments? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve with those changes.
Second.
Oh, I need a motion.
Oh, you did, okay.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on our agenda is to discuss and recommend recommendation of amending zoning requirements to allow for porches and covered entryways in the required front and side yards. This is our 7th meeting to discuss.
Correct, 7th meeting, but 3rd with this particular planning commission, so it's not quite that lengthy. But we're getting there. So yeah, if I may. So based on the conversation last month, I went back and revised some things that I've heard from the commission, moving forward with the version that was, that consensus was granted for. And there were 5 primary discussion points. They're all laid out in the memo here. One being lot coverage. I just added the reference to individual zoning requirements so that it's clear when we're administering the code that lot coverage does come into play. Floor height, there was a discussion of allowing porch floors below the entryway so you could step up into them. Our building inspector confirmed that is acceptable as long as it's no more than 8 inches, so that was added within there. Screening was discussed at last meeting, and so that was modified to say at least 50% of the exterior wall shall be open. Mesh screened areas and guardrails shall not be considered enclosed. Wait, I need to read that again.
This should be the opposite, right?
Because it shall be considered enclosed. I think that's correct. I hope that's correct in the version. But
You have like the not crossed out in there, so that was one of my questions of which way it is.
yeah, so
Which page?
To screen or not to screen?
Well, on page 15, where point 4 under B, design requirements, mesh screened areas and guardrails shall, and then you just have the not.
yes, the not should be removed because those at last meeting I heard that mesh screening would be considered enclosed. And so as it would read, it would say at least 50% of the exterior wall shall be open. Mesh screened areas and guardrails shall be considered enclosed, just for clarity that we know when we're administering it, that guardrails and mesh screening counts towards the enclosure. So the memo was not, I probably copied and pasted and didn't capture the formatting of that. The fourth item was notification to neighbors was added for construction of a new porch. Design review board currently has that with other things, so I just added, this particular element would require neighbor notification so that they could come to the meeting and listen in or participate with any concerns they had in terms of proximity to their property. And then lastly, a maximum depth of 10 feet for porch was added to limit the depth of porches on houses where the front facade is not uniform. There was discussion of the L-shaped facades or whatnot in the quote-unquote no man's land, which is not considered the front yard. So at this point, we maxed it at 10 feet so that no porch could extend beyond the 10 feet. And I'm sure there might be some discussion on that. So, but that was the general concept of the modifications. I did include a chart of front yard and the yellow highlighted area of the undefined area, which I think, after looking at it, perhaps was an intentional undefined area, which allows for the front patio and front deck to be within that certain area, not to extend beyond the front facade of the house, actually. So there's many iterations of that around the village. I went for a walk and found 2 quick examples last week.
Wait, which one? Can you just tell me the page? I'm sorry.
Page 11 of 35, there's 2 houses shown there. So the one on the left has a front concrete or masonry patio that doesn't extend beyond the front facade of that porch. And then the other one, there's a wooden deck that doesn't extend beyond the front of that as well. So patios and decks have limitations in front yards, but because they're within that area, that's not considered the front yard. That's that yellow area on the chart above it. The front yard starts at the nearest point of the front facade. So anything within that L-shaped or whatever.
Even though the stairs are past the front.
Stairs can go beyond for 6
Okay.
feet. That is a specific allotment. So the deck and the patio need to be within that area, but the stairs can encroach beyond.
Do you have a picture of one that, like a flat facade, so that if you wanted a porch, it would extend beyond the facade? So these 2 pictures show, as long as there's a piece of the house that's extended out, you can.
Yeah, these two examples were shown for that the undefined area within the front yard. But if it's a flat facade, the whole front yard is in fact a front yard then. So I didn't have an example of that specifically, but I can maybe look at what examples I provided and we can discuss it that way. 4434 Marlboro on page 17 of 35, that's a front uniform facade there. If you look at the survey, that's just one solid line. So that entire area there, when we get to the front yard, there is no undefined space. So within the current draft, this house would be allowed to have an 8-foot front porch.
Is that where the 8 foot came in for the minutes, by the way?
Yeah, there probably just discrepancy. It's 8 feet, but no closer than 10 feet to the property line. So those are the 2 numbers that we're keeping straight.
Trustee, Commissioner Kylie Miller.
When you were going through those 5 points, the topic overview, you had mentioned a maximum depth of 10 feet. Is that only for houses that have that L-shaped entryway? Otherwise, it's 8 feet?
It's 8 feet into the front yard, but it could be 10 feet if
You're starting further back?
correct.
Yes.
Okay.
The intention of the 10 feet was some houses have a very little bump out. I think like the house 4350 Woodburn's got a very little bump out up front. I didn't want to penalize them and say, well, the other 2 feet didn't count, so 10 feet was my compromise on that. Open for discussion, obviously. I didn't think.
But if you were 15 feet from the front setback, you could have a 15-foot porch.
Not within this current draft. So in the current draft design requirements, the maximum depth of the front porch shall be no more than 10 feet.
Okay.
That's how it's currently drafted.
Yeah, I know when we were first starting to talk about this a few years ago, that there was some industry standard, wasn't there, that like 8 feet is like the optimal size to have an enjoyable porch, like 6 feet's really too small to,
6 feet's the minimum, I think.
is that what it is?
Yeah, it's to be usable.
Yeah.
And I would agree that 8 feet is pretty standard, at least in my review of things. Like I said, I bumped it up to 10 just for those instances where the front door is slightly out there already. I didn't want that area between the front door of the main facade to penalize them the 2 feet, and they'd have to have a 6-foot somewhere else.
Projecting entryway.
Right, correct, yes.
Okay. I have a couple more questions.
Yep, do you want him to do you want to finish, or
Um,
do you want us to ask questions?
No, that was,
Doesn't
that was
matter.
pretty much it with my memo, so it's open for, I'm open for discussion.
Okay,
Okay, right above those two photographs on page 11, it's talking about above-grade patios and decks not allowed in the front yard. Now, I know that there are some homes, I know I've seen it at least on Lake Drive, that do already have front yard patios above grade. So if those property owners needed to repair or replace those structures, would they be grandfathered? And
Correct.
They would be limited?
Yes, correct. State statute would allow them to rebuild, they couldn't expand it, but they could rebuild as it was prior to this regulation.
Footprint.
Yes.
can I ask you something, because I wasn't here for the patio discussion, but why, is the state building code, did it change, they're not allowed to be elevated anymore?
I was also not here for the patio conversation, so
Okay. I just
I don't know.
Because, I mean, it's in here, right?
Yeah, so it's not in the front yard. I think it was intended to keep it within that area behind the front facade. Or if it's in the front, it was not to be elevated for less visual appearance. But I was not here for that conversation either. I don't know if anyone else, other plan commissioners, remember if there was a
I just
reason.
wonder why we're regulating that, if there's a good, I mean, there's a reason, but why?
Yeah, I was here for that, but
Yeah, I remember either.
Well, I mean,
it might have something to do with what the definition of patio is. Just,
is it just a slab?
yeah, I think it's usually a grade.
And I would say, at least from my perspective, aesthetically, a porch is more substantial than a patio to the point where you want to not allow patios. Patios are easier to build, right? You don't have to build a porch and same architectural details, so there might have been a reason to limit the availability of, patios on the front of houses where things could clutter up and accumulate. I suppose a porch is more architecturally significant.
And before you go on, I just want to welcome Trustee Carpenter to the Plan Commission. We had a change from last year, we altered the appointments on the Plan Commission for trustee.
Welcome to porches.
Porches and decks, don't start asking questions, we're just really joking. Sorry.
It's kind of like a mini-series.
Yeah.
It's been going for several years.
You gotta do the rewind button for a while.
And then on page 12, the restrictions. Number 2, it said deck shall not be located in the front yard and street side yard or the side or rear setback of a lot. Now, does that mean they're allowed, because it's not specifically mentioned, allowed in the non-street side yard? So in between, on the interior in between two houses?
Are you talking about 535-9, number 2F1?
F2?
2. Like the second paragraph.
Patio.
Correct, so they would be allowed in the side yard. So this is the current regulations for, just for clarity, so.
Changes a little bit on the.
Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause I was looking at the little diagram of rear yard, side yard, front yard on the previous page. And so I was thinking about that, so like mine, if there was room, then my neighbor could put a patio like in between their houses.
So this is referring to decks, just to be clear, it's two, we can look at patios as well, but this is
Or a
referring
deck,
to
but
the
they could
deck.
put a deck there, sorry.
Yep, as long as it doesn't encroach into the setback area. It could be in the yard, on the side yard, or the rear yard, as long as it's not in the setback area.
So for those few houses that have enough space.
Correct. Yep.
So I was gonna ask about that too, just going off that one before we move on. The rear setback of a lot, like I am under the impression that I don't really care what people do in the rear as long as it's safe. Like, why do we have such high regulations for?
So the setback is only 3 feet, just correct me if I'm wrong, Crystal, on that, so it's a very small amount, and I will say it does help with neighbor disputes in terms of their fence is too close to me, and in alleys particularly where things get too close to plowing and things like that, there is a good use for having a little bit of a setback, and 3 feet I don't think is too.
Should we do the same for fences then?
The fences can go up to the lot line. It's mostly like, like things like your garage. I mean, you can't put your garage in that 3-foot setback. You can't put, well, now in interior lots, your
Right.
patios can go up to the lot line. But
It's structures mostly that.
structures, yeah, decks, things like that. But fences are kind of an exception to the rule, I guess, because they can go up to your lot line.
but we do get a lot of neighborhood questions, calls of, that seems awfully close to me or whatnot. So I think there's a benefit of having a small, slight buffer.
I think there's also a misconception about the 3 foot, because we often get a lot of calls about even fences.
Yeah.
And people thinking, oh, that's too close to my house, where I just had a call today with a lady who thought it was too close, and it was within where it could be, but when you think 3 or 4 feet, it doesn't seem like a lot for some people, but
Right.
it was right where the fence can go. So.
Trees too, would be planted in there,
We
Yeah,
don't touch
landscaping,
trees.
yeah, landscaping is not permitted.
because that's usually the biggest one, but.
We had, when we built our fence, because there had been an existing fence there on the lot line, first it was denied, so I think we had to go to the Board of Appeals, but we did get a variance to put, because there was a garage across from us on the alley, so.
So on your lot line.
Yeah. on the lot line.
Everybody was denied.
So it was approved eventually.
Good, thank you.
All right, I got a couple more.
Sure.
On page 15, number 4, porch and covered entryway land area coverage shall count within the allowable area for principal structures per respective zoning districts. Could you just explain to me what that means, like in plain, non-zoning code language?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. So, most zoning districts, the R5 and R6, which covers most of the village, allows for 30% coverage of a principal structure, 10% of an accessory structure, but currently certain things aren't included within the principal structure calculation. So this is just trying to make it clear that a porch and a covered entryway would be added to the principal structure. So,
So of your whole property, only, your principal structure can only take up 30%.
30%, correct.
And garage or shed or whatever.
An extra
No,
10.
10.
Yep.
Got it.
Side yards are 40% for the principal structure, but that's less common, but at most standard is 30%, and that was illustrated, is intended to be illustrated on the following examples.
Mhm.
It's just showing they're allowed 30%, but most of them have around 20, so if there is room.
So can I just ask a question then? What about decks? I know I always get this confused. Are decks porches?
Decks are not porches, and I don't know if I have here, I don't believe decks count towards the coverage ratio,
For the principal structure?
correct?
Would they count towards the auxiliary structure?
No.
Because they're not enclosed?
Typically the water goes through.
Correct, my impression was it's a permeability thing, so that there's no enclosure on top of it, and they're permeable in terms of the decking.
So if you had a deck with
I
a
see.
pergola over it, that is not a porch.
Correct. So it's not enclosed.
So it relates to stormwater, correct?
And then continuing on that page, number B1, again, it says the maximum depth shall be no more than 10 feet, so we're just gonna kind of not talk about 8 feet anymore, we're just gonna say 10.
We could say the plan commission could obviously, choose to go up. I bumped up to 10 after looking at some examples and seeing very slight entryways and thinking, well, that's essentially limiting their porch to 6 feet then, because they already have that 2 feet. So I didn't think the 2 extra feet would be
Okay.
bad, but that was my impression based on just field observations.
And then number 3, where it says porch and covered entryway roof height shall be at maximum of 1 story, a second floor deck with railing may be allowed. I can see where that might be valuable when you have a duplex, because then your tenants also have some outdoor space. I'm not crazy about it even in that situation, but I just want I don't know how anybody else felt about that, but
Isn't
yeah,
this
you're
the-
putting an outdoor deck next to somebody's bedroom window.
Yeah, I thought we had discussed it last meeting and we were okay with it, so nothing had changed there.
Because not all of us are okay with it.
Well, I think we talked about the architectural review board would also
Yeah.
be looking at the cases, or on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. I think that's it for that section.
Anyone have any comments on that section?
I also just wanted to point out for some additional information, so on page 21, on page 20 of 35, that is one house that has actually tried to apply for a porch in the past and has been denied based on the setback. They have a very slight bump out, and they want to go out a little further, but that's currently been disallowed, so just for reference, this is one property that has actually come into the office and, running into the current code.
Which one is it?
Page 20 of 35, it's a typo there, 4464 North Maryland, 44464. They have a slight covered entryway as it was. They wanted to bump that out to be fully covered when you entered. But because the average setback of the block is 34 feet, and they're currently back, are they currently back? Yes, they couldn't go any further, essentially, is what it was after we did the calculation. And so they just chose not to at the time. But I did make a mental note, and I told them that the conversation has been going on, for a couple of years, that if it were to change and under this version, they'd be allowed to have, a 10 or 8 foot porch. I don't think they want anything that big. They just want to be able to bump those 2 columns out and have a more substantial entryway, but that is one that has currently been limited based on the current code. And the second one on page 22 of 35, 1616 Olive, this is one where they chose to do a patio instead, just because the front porch wasn't allowed. I'm not suggesting that they want to do a front porch, but they came in wanting to use something in the front, and they did an on-grade patio, which, is what they were allowed, but they couldn't have done anything further based on the current codes. There are 2 examples. There was one I thought on Larkin that kind of sparked all of this, and remembers that, but we couldn't identify which house that was. But I tried to bring in examples of people that have at least stopped at the office to discuss a desire for improvements in the front of the house.
I have one question on page 16. It says design review board. I know we've been talking about that a lot. What do they review? So, new construction to the 200 square feet or more to an existing structure, or construction of a new front porch.
So this is just a section related to what is noticed for them. They review more than this, but if these types of applications come in, this is what we send to the neighbors to notify the neighbors of an application. So yeah, this,
So it's mostly structural. It's not like a deck or. That's the-
correct, no, yep. And we don't have that many additions, so we don't do this.
It's typically big additions that get noticed because it has to expand the footprint by 200 square feet. So if it's a second floor deck and not expanding the footprint, that doesn't get noticed. It's pretty much if you're making your house bigger.
But is there decks that are bigger than 200 square feet?
But right now, we don't notice for any, because decks just don't get noticed.
But they still get reviewed? Because we've been talking like, oh,
Rear yard decks, no.
The rear yard decks do not get
No.
reviewed.
Would it be clearer to say what is reviewed?
There's a section, I just didn't,
Okay.
wasn't relevant to the porch section, but if 225 is the full section on design review board, I don't have my laptop with me.
This is
Pull it
just
up.
talking about what gets noticed. Because what gets noticed for neighbors for them is minimal. It's mostly expansion of footprint or new construction.
Right, and I don't mind that. I just remember a conversation maybe 2 meetings ago or whatever, when we talked about, well, your neighbors will want to know about these decks because they were going, I think it might have been Commissioner Patel, Sangeeta. But anyways, this would just negate that. Like, you wouldn't know your neighbors asking for a deck. You would just hopefully scan the agendas or something.
Well, and decks, I think, are not, because they're not allowed in the front, and we don't review them if they're in the backyard. Decks just aren't taken to design review board.
Decks are not.
Because they're not publicly visible in the front,
Okay.
so.
Yeah. Decks and patios are just, we can just install them with a building permit.
Okay. I'm fine with that. I just wanted to check it.
Just a quick, the use of the word may, that's something like in the one that you covered, section 3B3 on page 15, where it says a second floor deck with railing may be allowed. Do you have to qualify that to say in which cases it would be? Usually we say like shall or.
Yeah, I think and maybe it was unintentional or not, but I think I went with may there in terms of subject to design review board and things like that. I wouldn't want to say that we have to allow them if by chance they don't fit the architecture or it doesn't work. I don't want to say that we have to require them. So I'm saying that, subject to every other condition here, they may be allowed, but that's just my
Do you need a
interpretation of
a
it.
qualifier then after that, like subject to?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
What page are you on? I'm sorry.
On 15,
I'm not opposed to the qualifier as long as I know that it catches everything, which is why maybe you left it out, but
Which paragraph?
3.
3 under B.
3B3. And then I've also noticed 3A2 has a may in
But
it.
could you just say, subject to all design criteria, or, so you're not just saying design review board, but you're subject to what? Design,
The whims.
just like stated design criteria, or, I don't know. Design approval?
Yeah, I didn't know who would
Who is design?
go to. Yeah, if it was architecture review board or.
I think design approval would be the primary cripping factor. Because any building code is gonna overarch that, that doesn't need to be said.
Right.
But I would think design approval would be the same way. And then on that same light, I just noticed in 3A2, it probably should say porches and covered entryways shall not be located
Yeah, that's.
beyond the side setback. So it's a good catch on that. I have not given this to Nathan for a final review, so he might catch other things like that, but it's a good point to just re-review that, because I don't want to have to modify it in 6 months if I don't have to.
So maybe it's two things, right? It's subject to building code and design approval?
We could put building code in here. I don't know that I need to put building code in here, because that's just, you're not going to get a permit if it doesn't pass the building code. Whereas opposed to design approval is a little more subjective and not. So I would leave that one as just design approval.
Anybody else have any on this area?
Were you going to go through the drawings?
I could. So yeah, the examples are on page 17, and I can just briefly go over. I will say it was more difficult finding examples than I thought. I mean, we have a lot of plans and things on file, but most houses in Shorewood have porches already, so finding examples of where people might add them on was a little less easy. But so this one has a flat facade. The setback is 25 feet or greater the average. The block's approximately 30 feet. So the current setback is 30 feet. So under the current code, they could not have a covered entryway or a porch. And then the lot coverage, the primary structure is allowed to have 30%. The actual approximate of that is only 14.64, so there's actually plenty of room on this property for an additional, 8-foot porch in that respect, as long as encroaching into the front yard is acceptable based on the revision. So
So
that-
it would qualify now with
Correct.
changes? Okay.
with the changes, this would qualify for a porch or for a covered entryway if they desire. Currently, it does not. For all of these, but so 2201 East Menlo, this is a corner property. So 40% lot coverage allows for even more space if it were that. This is one of those where it's an L shape, as it were, where there's a 5.6-foot indent. So they, in theory, could extend 10 feet off of that indent if they were to do a porch or covered entryway there. But once again, it's a house without a porch or covered entryway that maybe someone might consider in the future wanting to add something over the doorway. I don't anticipate this one architecturally having a porch extending along the whole property, because it's going to cover that window in the front, but it just architecturally would be difficult to pull that off, and I think the design review board would acknowledge that. But a covered entryway or something smaller in that over that doorway, I think, could be accomplished.
So can I ask another question? When we talked about having that second floor allowed, is that just for duplexes, or is it any on top of the covered, if there's a window or a door up there?
It would be for single family as well, if they
Okay.
wanted the master walkout or something.
Yeah, that's cute, so I can run, so just wondering.
I guess I don't want to go through all of these, I don't have to, but 4350 Woodburn, another house that didn't have anything currently over the front entry or porch, but I could see something being added over that old triangle entryway, just to add a covered entry or maybe extending further. Setback is 25 feet or greater. It's currently approximately 28 feet on the block. They're at 27.9, so once again, nothing's currently allowed in the front. But they could, under current code, under the proposed revision, consider adding something on there. Their lot coverage is at 20.72, so they'd have plenty of room to consider, adding something to it without exceeding the 30% allotment. Kind of discussed 4464 Maryland already. Currently not allowed to have it, but the proposal would allow them to add that on. Once again, they're just looking for a small extension over the front entryway that was not a full extension beyond the whole property, or the whole building, I should say. And then 4030 Downer Avenue, this is a smaller front yard. So the setback is 25 feet or greater. The block average is approximately 20 feet, so these houses are a little more, encroaching to the public right of way. But within the current proposal, they would be allowed to have it because they wouldn't be beyond 10 feet if their current setback is, looks like 26.7 perhaps. Adding 8-foot porch there would still get them, plenty of room to have a minimum 10-foot front yard. So like I said, it was difficult to find full examples, but I tried to get them geographically and architecturally diverse. We already kind of went over 1616 Olive. They have to do a front patio just to, utilize the front of their house. I think it's south facing, so it gets nice sun, I think. So they just wanted to do that, so they opted for a porch. But their coverage is 30% allotment. They have 18.9, so once again, plenty of room to add that. Setback is 25 feet or greater. The block average is only 25 feet, so they weren't allowed currently to extend beyond that. So these are the 6 examples I tried to find or pull out that I thought were relevant for.
Did you find that there was any style of housing particular that does not have porches, like maybe when they were built? Like that design review would be like, no, that's
Yeah,
the
colonial,
style.
and I was trying to find an example of, I don't think I did, 60s or 70s, like more flat front facade.
Yeah,
There's a lot more in Whitefish Bay I was finding when I was like looking for one here, but those typically don't have any sort of covered entry.
that was the 60s and 70s, yeah, they would look really good with a porch, but.
Or covered entry or something, just, to
Yeah,
help the
Add
front
some
facade, but
features.
yeah. Most of our housing stock is, pre-war and that was the era of porches, so that
interesting.
it's kind of relevant. I couldn't find as many. Then the next one was kind of more of a unscientific guess because I don't have access to CAD or anything like that to actually make full measurements on it. So this is in terms of wall coverage ratios. I went on recent design review board approvals of houses that had porches or that were reopening them or things like that, just to give an approximate of what I was seeing. And so in this first one on page 23, the yellow area represents the full wall area, and then the black area is just an outline silhouette of what I've determined to be covered in terms of the piers or railings. And so approximately 60, 75%, 60% open, just based on some rough measurements of those. And then similarly, if you look on page 24, the next one, 60%, 70%, 60%. Most people don't extend above the handrail portion of it, so if you're looking at 8-foot ceiling or something like that, you're looking at 3/8 coverage, so 50% seems to be a good minimum threshold for me. I wouldn't want to go above that just because it's difficult to work in that design-wise. Similarly, on the next one, approximately 60%, 65%, 60%. This one, the front is a little more covered because the stairs go on the side, so there's more coverage in the front, but it's still only at the 36-inch height, so it is still pretty open. And then page 26 has a little thicker piers, a little more, historically thicker, more substantial piers. And so that does get close to the 50% just because there is more beef to that particular area, so I approximately 50%, 60%, 50%. So if we were to go any higher than that, something like this probably wouldn't pass muster, but I think the brick piers are appropriate to the architectural style of the house, so I would just advocate for the 50% if we're looking at that number. Similarly, page 27, they have thicker style piers that I think match the style of this house. So 50%, 80%, 50%, just because the side, it has the full wall covering and the thicker piers. So I think 50% is the lowest I would consider going. I know there was discussion of beefing that up in the last meeting, but I hope with those kind of examples that we understand that 50% can look architecturally legitimate. And then a little more open style, and the last one is 60%, 70%, 60%, just a little thinner treatments. So that's what I could pull together with with the capabilities and technology that I have in the office downstairs, so.
It's a lot of work, so thank you for.
Sure, yeah, no, I
I
think it was good visuals, yeah.
I'm actually surprised that 50% is the right number that you showed.
Yeah, I think I think those two examples, when there was thicker piers, really, prove that we probably shouldn't go higher than that if we want to
Yeah.
keep architecture options.
Fabulous. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Commissioner Kennedy?
Just one last thing, I was on the losing side of the vote last month, but, so I thought it was really interesting, I was reading the 2010 comprehensive plan in preparation for our second discussion tonight, and in the chapter on housing, when it got to neighborhoods, that they had a paragraph here that talked about neighborhoods and what's good about them, and said, they also have a variety of dwelling types with setbacks consistent with neighboring buildings, allowing consistent street views and harmonious landscapes, which was what we were saying that, Dan and I were saying that we liked. So I'm just gonna say it was in the comprehensive plan.
Neighbor may not. It's outdated, no, I'm joking. Yes, Commissioner Quinn.
So the only thing I wanted to, we want to make sure that porches aren't places that you can store all your stuff. So just don't close them in, don't put screens on them. You have to blatantly say don't put up, plexiglass sheets.
Yeah, that would count towards the wall coverage in my opinion, anything that's not open air, and that would be a zoning infraction and or code enforcement, that if we saw someone enclose it, that we could, send a letter saying that it's not allowed per code to do that.
Are you saying because we specifically talk about screening,
Yeah, we
should we, is there, or other like materials? I don't know.
I've lost my spot, here we go.
Or-
Mesh screen areas or guardrails should be considered enclosed. Do we need to add windows, glass,
Plexiglass.
plastic, windows? I don't know what the right word is.
No,
Or inserts.
or other like material, or,
You could, I mean, it's that, so
Or
that,
might be into,
no, if it helps, it helps, that doesn't hurt, so the opening sentence is, 50% shall be open, and then the intent was to clarify with some things that we think are common, and so it'd be easy to add, windows, mesh screening, and guardrails shall be considered enclosed. I have no problem with, if windows is the right
windows or
word.
plexiglass,
doors.
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 I would just say, and like material or example, examples and put.
Or if you say glazing, that'll cover
Glazing, covered glass.
glass and plastic and acrylics.
There was that section where it said they should not be used as three-season rooms or.
Yeah.
Does that? They're not lived in.
Yeah, I can add glazing and
Can you put
doors.
a couch on them? I know Milwaukee
Yes.
has ordinances that now, I think, prohibit that.
It'd be interesting.
In
Milwaukee,
porches.
you said?
I thought so.
Specific to a couch as opposed to other furniture?
Yeah, because there's all these old couches that are out there, and if they're not made for being outdoors, and I don't remember if they outlawed them or what, but I just remember it was a big thing.
You see that in student housing in Madison.
Yeah, and we have a campus close. I don't know.
I can look into what they might have in there, and if it's worth adding, we could add it.
We don't have a problem.
We don't have a
need to-
problem.
Right, okay, I was just thinking more of the south side of our
Sure.
village, and I don't drive it out. All right, well, what do you need from us? What is it a motion?
So this would be an ordinance change, so it would require a recommendation from the plan commission, upon which I would schedule a public hearing at a board meeting, notice of the public, and provide opportunity to comment prior to any sort of board action. So it would require a recommendation to the plan commission to move forward.
And is it roll call vote? Because it's an ordinance, or is that just at the board level?
Just at the board level.
Okay. And we don't need a public hearing here.
Correct.
All right, so do I have a motion?
I can do that. Unless you do it. So, I move to recommend approval by the village board of the proposed amendments pertaining to zoning requirements for porches and covered entryways in required front and side yards.
Do you want to make it subject to the discussion,
Yeah, the changes, like we talked about, the maze shall become shall.
and including glazing and,
So these changes discussed.
so yeah, the three changes I have, just for clarity, are 3A2 would be changing may to shall. 3B3 would be adding the clause subject to design approval, and then 3B4 would be adding glazing to the portions considered enclosed.
So subject to those three things. Do I have a motion? And a second? Okay, do you want to read back the motion and then we can take a vote unless there's further discussion?
Holy cow, I didn't even write it down, she read it so fast.
It's in the memo.
Is this the
Page
page
11.
Yep.
I was looking for it and you went way too fast. So, a motion to recommend approval by the village board of the proposed amendments pertaining to zoning requirements for porches and covered entryways in required front and side yards. Subject to changes, 3A2, changing may to shall, 3B3, requiring design approval, and adding glazing to 3B4.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 2.
Yep.
Did I count myself? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5, 2. Thank you. So next we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is number 6, discussion pertaining to updating the village's comprehensive plan in 2020. Director Barton.
So after last meeting, I had sent out a link to the current comprehensive plan as well as state legislation in terms of what is required and particularly what's required in terms of an update, because we already do have a comp plan. Without one, we technically would not be able to change ordinances pertaining to zoning because it needs to be consistent with the comp plan. So there is a deadline somewhat looming to get this accomplished. So recognizing the large effort that it could entail, including budgetary requests from the village board, I kind of want to have this conversation early in the summer so that I know what the plan commission is looking for in terms of a request for next year's efforts. So I laid it all out, and we can discuss if you have any questions on it, but just to focus the conversation, there's essentially probably two to three options. One being just a more simple update, which might involve me hiring an intern or something like that to help me update the numbers, re-clarify the goals at the plan commission level, have public involvement in that respect. But that would be one option. In my current year and a half that I've been here, the comp plan has not been referenced all that much. And so my personal opinion is I like spending the time and effort on specific topics, whether that's a transportation plan or a housing market study or things like that. I'd rather utilize planning efforts and budgetary measures for those kind of studies. So the first option, which is I believe what the village did last time, Erica hired an intern and just worked together with existing resources to work the planning commission and have those kind of things. That would be one option to update it. However, if the planning commission wants a full redo, that could cost anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000 to $100,000 to hire a consultant to cover every single chapter and do all the mapping and things like that. But as a built-out community that hasn't really changed much in 10 years, I don't know that that's a necessary activity. So I shared the current comp plan. I think there's plenty of opportunity to update the numbers and figures and reconfirm the goals that were in there. I don't think we've changed that much in 10 years. So it'd be my recommendation or thought that we could go on the lesser end of things, but I'm open to conversation here.
So I have a question. I agree with you, but in the last 10 years, I don't see any, we haven't done, last year during prioritization, the board, it was the first time we talked about comprehensive plans, studies comprehensively. And that should have happened, it should have been going on the whole time, in my opinion. But now that this board, the composition of the village board right now is much more comprehensive, so they don't want smaller studies, they want bigger studies so that we can look at our village as a whole. So we have a housing study underway, or getting underway. We have a transportation and parking study, village-wide, which has been asked for. How then, because we've been so lacking those studies, how then can those recommendations and policy changes get incorporated as we go? I'm okay with, I know I've done many comprehensive plans, so updating the numbers is no big deal, but when do you amend that comprehensive plan, because we do it obviously once every 10 years it looks like, is it intermittent? Do we say, okay, now our transportation and parking study's done, we have these recommendations, the village board adopts it, and then how do you get that into your actual comp plan?
Yeah, you could amend the plan based on when that's adopted. So the current comprehensive plan has, the data in the front of it, and then it's got a very short section about, goals and objectives. And then there's some implementation strategies. And currently, the current comprehensive plan, those implementation strategies do say, implement the bike plan from 2007 or when it was adopted, or implement the seniors housing study.
I
So
think that though. So for me, a comp plan is your umbrella for all the smaller things, and your umbrella is your high-level policy. So for instance, Commissioner Kylie Miller said, at some point, we may have thought in our comp plan, parking on the street, or you said like being, what's the word you used for that? We may want to change that perception, that consistency of a lot line is important. That's a bigger thing, and then you have all these different zoning codes that come changes. Or if parking in the front, say our comp plan 10 years ago said, parking in front of houses is, brings safety concerns, and so therefore, we want to have, and then if that view changes, that big overview, which it may, it's still, I think your comp plan should reflect your values so that your codes then and everything that implements it are much more specific, but that would follow that general statement.
yeah, maybe I'm not getting the full question, so help me if I'm not. But the comp plan really does have the overall goals and objectives. Each chapter has like 2 or 3 goals. They're very broad.
Too broad, probably.
Right, and then the objectives are a little more narrowed, and then the implementation strategy is more specific elements. So,
Like the zoning code.
right. So, for example, like I'm sure the comp plan, I probably do that example in front of me, but it probably says, encourage multimodal transportation or bike ped things. And then the next goal is, increase biking activity. Then the actual implementation step is, look at the plan that we'd adopted in 2008 to do that. So the broad goal is in there, and at any time that can be reviewed. And within either of these 2 strategies, that would be the primary focus of what the planning commission would do. It would be, here's the updated data, here's the goals that they were 10 years ago. Do we still have those goals? Should we tweak the goals? Should we add a new goal? But I don't know that we have to throw the whole set out to start over, because I don't think that we changed that much. But at a minimum, I do agree that is the primary purpose of the comp plan, is to set those large goals. And then when we do another study, we would say, hey, reference the comp plan to find the overarching goals and help us fill in the details on that. So I don't know if that answered the question or not.
It does. I just feel like there is going to be, in the last 10 years, because nothing was real comprehensive, you didn't have to make any changes, but there has been significant view changes on transportation, on shared rides, on the housing market, when we get that.
Yeah, there's
So I just
technology
feel like
and stuff,
if there's
right?
something bigger, like shared student and elderly housing coming out of the plan with the other services, if that is a real big, push for the next 10 years, then you'd want some sort of policy saying shared housing is encouraged. It's broad, but that might not have been true 10 years ago. So I just was wondering, when do you add that when the study's done?
I would actually think that's probably in there under just like the overarching terms of, a mix of options, including affordable options. I think you could argue that co-housing, which they're talking about, currently manages something like that.
Maybe I'm just thinking that I use comp plans a lot elsewhere, and here we say, is it consistent with comp plan, but it's really not that valuable. That document, in my opinion, is not that valuable. And so do we want to make it valuable, more valuable by adding more content, or do we want to just keep it that broad and pretend like everything's consistent with it?
It's definitely the most valuable in redevelopment.